Is this some kind of sick joke, ma'am? Corporal Cody Evans' voice cut through the desert heat, dripping with youthful arrogance. He gestured at the bright orange rifle on the bench, an absurd splash of color against the tactical gear. Behind him, a few young Marines chuckled, viewing the old woman with her silver bun and wrinkled face as a bizarre sideshow. With all due respect, you can't have that thing here. This is a live fire range. He puffed out his chest. But the old woman, Eleanor Vance, remained perfectly still, her silence a challenge he couldn't comprehend. Before I tell you what flashed in Eleanor's eyes and how a general stormed this range, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. The Mojave sun was merciless, baking the cracked earth of the long-distance range. The air itself seemed to vibrate with heat, shimmering invisible waves above the baked dirt and scrub brush of the sprawling Mojave Desert Range. It was a place built for noise and precision, for the thunderous crack of high-velocity rounds and the silent, deadly calculus of ballistics. Yet, around shooting bench number 12, an unnatural quiet had fallen, a pocket of tension that was heavier than the oppressive heat. Corporal Cody Evans stood there, his shadow falling across the old woman and her garish orange rifle, feeling the eyes of every other shooter on him. He was used to being watched, but this was different. This was a test. His authority, the very core of his identity as a Marine non-commissioned officer, was being silently questioned by this relic. Her stillness was unnerving. She didn't argue. She didn't protest. She simply sat on her stool, her posture relaxed but unyielding, her gaze fixed downrange on a target so distant it was a mere speck in the shimmering haze. He had to end this. Her defiance, quiet as it was an insult to his uniform, to his very being. "Did you hear me, ma'am?" Evans pressed on, his voice rising slightly, a breach of the strict range etiquette. "This isn't a knitting club. We're conducting advanced sniper qualifications here. That toy," he pointed again, his finger jabbing the air, "is a distraction and a safety hazard." His words were laced with a rehearsed condescension, the kind a young man uses when he feels power slipping through his fingers. He needed to reassert control, not just for himself, but for the benefit of his squad, who were watching with a mixture of amusement and anticipation. The private first class next to him, a kid named Miller with a constellation of freckles across his nose, snickered audibly. "Maybe she thinks it's a super soaker, Corporal, for when she gets thirsty." A ripple of laughter went through the small group of young recon Marines. They were the new generation, masters of digital scopes and wind-reading sensors, warriors of the modern age. To them, Eleanor Vance, with her deeply lined face and her strangely colored rifle, was a ghost from forgotten war, an amusing anecdote to share back in the barracks. Evans, emboldened by his subordinate's joke, leaned in closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial stage whisper that was still loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Look, Grandma, I'm gonna have to ask you to pack up your equipment and vacate the firing line. You probably don't even have the proper clearance to be on this facility." He was fishing now, searching for any legitimate reason to eject her. He expected her to finally comply, to perhaps protest feebly before packing her things. Instead, her movement was slow and deliberate. She reached for a simple canvas bag at her feet, and for a moment, Evans thought he'd won. But she didn't reach for the rifle. She pulled out a worn leather wallet, softened by decades of use. She opened it and produced a laminated ID card, her base access permit, holding it out without a word. Evans snatched it from her hand. He scanned it, then did a double take, turning it over and over as if expecting it to dissolve and reveal the fraud. The name read Vance, Eleanor J. To his immense frustration, the credentials were all in order, the expiration date years away. He shoved the card back at her, his irritation mounting. "Fine," he conceded, his voice tight with anger. "You have access. That doesn't mean you can play with your toys during our qualification." He gestured downrange toward the barely visible 4,000-meter target. "That is a multi-million-dollar sensor suite, not a backstop for your personal science project. We are pushing the absolute limits of modern military technology." The last thing we need is a stray round from whatever that is, messing up our data. The freckle-faced private, feeling brave, took a step forward. With a smirk, he reached out and poked the orange stock of Eleanor's rifle with his finger. "Feels like cheap plastic," he sneered. "Bet you 3D printed it in your garage." The instant the young Marine's finger made contact with the rifle, something shifted. It wasn't physical. It was in Eleanor's eyes. The calm, patient gaze of the old woman vanished, replaced by something ancient and hard as flint, a chilling cold that seemed to extinguish the desert sun. The air around the bench grew heavy, charged with a silent, terrifying gravity. The touch of the young Marine's finger on the rifle was like a key turning in a lock that had been rusted shut for 40 years. The blistering heat of the Mojave evaporated, replaced by the cloying, humid chill of a monsoon night in the jungles of Southeast Asia. The sharp smell of cordite and dust was gone, supplanted by the scent of wet earth, rotting vegetation, and the metallic tang of blood. She wasn't an old woman on a shooting range. She was a young operator, alone and hunted, huddled in a makeshift shelter crafted from the wreckage of a downed reconnaissance plane. The phantom weight of a wounded man, a pilot named Anderson, leaned against her, his breathing shallow and ragged from the fever raging through the shrapnel wound in his leg. She could hear the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of enemy mortars walking their way closer through the dense jungle, each explosion a countdown to their discovery. "They're coming, El," the pilot had mumbled, his voice strained with pain and fear. "They know we're here. You have to finish it." Her hands, now wrinkled and spotted with age, felt the phantom memory of cold, hard steel. She had worked for 3 days straight, fueled by adrenaline and a desperate will to survive, using salvage parts from the aircraft's fuselage and a block of aluminum from its frame. She had milled the receiver by hand, her movements precise and sure even as her body screamed with exhaustion. It was a masterpiece of battlefield improvisation, a tool born of pure necessity. "Why orange, El?" the pilot had asked, his eyes hazy with fever as he watched her apply the last coat of paint, a garish, unnatural color she'd mixed from the contents of a survival flare kit. She hadn't looked up from her work. "Because I only plan on making one shot," she had replied, her voice steady despite the tremor of fatigue. "After that, I want to be easy to find, one way or another." The orange wasn't a joke. It wasn't for show. It was a beacon for her own rescue or her own demise, a single point of unnatural color in a sea of green, a symbol of a promise hinging on the success of one impossible shot. She blinked, and the jungle receded, leaving the bright desert sun and the smirking face of a boy who had no concept of such choices. Across the range, standing near the control tower, Gunny Miller, a retired master sergeant now serving as the civilian range safety officer, watched the confrontation with a growing sense of dread. He'd seen his share of arrogant young NCOs trying to prove themselves, but this was different. It wasn't just the disrespect, it was the target of it. He'd noticed the old woman when she signed in that morning. Vance Eleanor J. The name hadn't meant anything then, but now, watching her, he saw things the young Marines couldn't. He saw the profound stillness that spoke of immense discipline, the economy of motion that was the hallmark of a true professional. And the rifle, as strange as it looked, had the clean, purposeful lines of a custom tool, not a toy. His eyes narrowed. He'd seen a rifle like that once before, a long time ago, in a grainy photograph during a classified briefing about a ghost, a legend from a war the history books barely mentioned. They called the operator the Ghost of the Ridge. The name on the sign-in sheet, Eleanor J. Vance, suddenly clicked into place with a half-remembered legend, and a cold knot of dread formed in his stomach. These kids weren't just disrespecting a veteran. They were poking a sleeping giant. Miller turned, his decision made. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his back to the unfolding drama, and scrolled through his contacts. He was about to make a call that could get him fired, a massive overstep of his authority. But he also knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that it was a call he had to make. "Lieutenant," he said when a line connected, his voice low and urgent. "This is Gunny Miller out at the long-range facility. I have a situation here." We have some young Marines from 1st Recon giving a hard time to an old-timer named Eleanor Vance. There was a pause. Just run the name up the chain, Lieutenant, Miller insisted, his voice hardening. Run it up the chain fast, and tell them it's about her rifle. The orange one. Inside the sterile, climate-controlled quiet of the base command center, 2nd Lieutenant Harris stared at his phone, a frown creasing his brow. Gunny Miller was a rock. He wasn't prone to drama or exaggeration. The gunny's urgent tone was an alarm bell Harris couldn't ignore. With a sigh, he swiveled in his chair and typed the name into the Global Military Personnel Database. Vance, Eleanor J. The system spun for a moment, processing the query. Then the screen flashed. A bright, glaring red flag popped up, dominating the display. Alongside it, text that made the air in Harris's lungs turn to ice. Access restricted. Eyes only. Clearance O, 7 and above. Harris felt a physical jolt, as if he'd touched a live wire. 07. That was a brigadier general. He was a 2nd lieutenant, a rank so far down the food chain, he was practically plankton. He shot up from his desk, his chair flying back and hitting the wall with a sharp crack. He walked, almost ran, to the office of the base commander, a full colonel named Price. He knocked once and entered without waiting for a reply. Sir, you need to see this. Colonel Price, a man with a face like a roadmap of every desert conflict for the past 30 years, looked up from his paperwork, his expression a mask of annoyance. What is it, Lieutenant? This had better be good. Harris didn't waste time with pleasantries. Sir, I got a call from Gunny Miller at the long range. There's a civilian out there, an Eleanor Vance. The system flagged her. Heavily, the colonel's demeanor shifted instantly. The annoyance vanished, replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. He came around his desk and looked at the lieutenant's computer screen. When he saw the name and the bright red flag, all the color drained from his face. For a long moment, he didn't speak. He just stared, his mind clearly racing. Then, he moved with a purpose that electrified the room. He turned to his own desk and picked up the secure telephone, the red line that connected directly to the office of the commanding general of the entire Marine Corps base, Brigadier General Evelyn Marcus. Ma'am, it's Colonel Price. I apologize for the interruption, he said, his voice tight and formal. There was a pause as he listened. Ma'am, she's here. Vance, she's on our range. Right now. Another pause, longer this time. Yes, ma'am. The ghost of the ridge. She's in some kind of confrontation with a few of our recon Marines. The colonel listened for another moment, his face grim, his knuckles white as he gripped the phone. Yes, ma'am. I'll meet you at your vehicle. We're rolling now. He slammed the phone down and looked at Harris, his eyes blazing with an intensity the lieutenant had never seen. The command center, usually a low hum of activity, seemed to fall silent around them. Give me the commander of 1st Recon on the line now. Price barked. Tell him his career is hanging by a thread. Tell him General Marcus is en route to his location personally. And God help his Marines if they've so much as breathed on her wrong. The message was clear. A force of nature had been awakened, and a storm was about to break over the Mojave Desert. Back at the range, blissfully unaware of the tempest he had unleashed, Corporal Evans's patience had finally and completely evaporated. The old woman's silent, immovable presence had become a personal affront, a challenge to his very authority in front of his men. He had to end this now. All right, that's it. I'm done asking, he snapped, taking a menacing step forward. I am ordering you to vacate this firing point. If you don't, I will have you detained. He reached for Eleanor Vance's shoulder, intending to physically escort her from the bench. He never made it. The sound began not as a noise, but as a feeling, a low, deep vibration felt through the soles of their combat boots, a tremor in the very ground beneath them. It grew quickly, blossoming into the percussive, throaty roar of multiple high-performance engines being pushed to their absolute limit. Every head on the range snapped toward the main access road. A colossal plume of dust was billowing into the sky, chasing a convoy of 3 black, government-plated SUVs and a lead Humvee that were closing the distance at a terrifying, unnatural speed. They weren't just driving. They were charging eating up the desert terrain like a predator closing in on its prey. The convoy bypassed the main parking area entirely, veering directly onto the graded dirt of the range itself, and skidding to a halt in a perfectly executed maneuver just yards behind the confrontation at Bench 12. The dust had barely begun to settle when doors flew open and figures emerged with a disciplined, urgent precision that made the elite recon Marines look like clumsy amateurs in a school play. Out of the lead SUV stepped Colonel Price, his face a grim mask of controlled fury. But it was the figure who emerged from the passenger side of the second vehicle that caused every jaw on the range to drop and every spine to snap ramrod straight. Brigadier General Evelyn Marcus, a woman whose iron will and combat record were the stuff of Marine Corps legend, stepped onto the dirt. She wore her immaculate uniform, her single silver star gleaming like a shard of ice in the desert sun. Her sharp, intelligent eyes swept the scene, taking in the arrogant posture of Corporal Evans, the stunned faces of his men, and finally settling on the calm, seated figure of Eleanor Vance. She ignored everyone else. Her stride was powerful and direct as she walked straight toward the old woman. The entire range had fallen utterly silent. The only sounds were the crunch of her boots on the gravel and the metallic pinging of the cooling SUV engines. Corporal Evans stood frozen, his hands still hovering in the air where he had intended to grab Eleanor. His mind was a frantic, screaming void, unable to process the impossible scene unfolding before him. General Marcus stopped directly in front of Eleanor Palmer. She didn't speak. Instead, she brought her heels together with a sharp crack of authority, her arms snapping up in the crispest, most respectful salute Evans had ever witnessed. It was not the perfunctory salute given to a superior officer. It was a salute of profound, almost reverent respect, the kind a warrior gives to a living god of war. "Ma'am," General Marcus said, her voice clear and strong, carrying across the silent range with absolute clarity. "It is an honor, ma'am. I apologize for the conduct of my Marines. They are ignorant of who they are addressing." She held the salute, her eyes locked on Eleanor's, waiting. Slowly, gracefully, Eleanor Vance rose from her stool. She was not as tall as she once was, but she stood with a ramrod straightness that defied her years. She gave a slight, acknowledging nod. Only then did the general drop her salute. She turned to face Corporal Evans, and the warmth and respect in her eyes were replaced by a glacial ice that promised a world of pain. "Corporal," she began, her voice dangerously quiet. "Do you have any idea who this woman is?" Evans, pale and trembling, could only stammer. "No, ma'am. She's a civilian, ma'am." "A civilian?" The general let out a short, humorless laugh that held no mirth. "Corporal, this is not just a civilian. This is Eleanor Vance." She said the name as if it were a benediction. "This woman holds the highest civilian award for valor our country can bestow. Before that, she served in places your history books don't even have names for. She is credited with 5 confirmed kills at over 2,500 yards, a record that stood for nearly 4 decades, all achieved with a rifle she designed and built herself in the field. We call her the Ghost of the Ridge. She is the reason our sniper doctrine is what it is today." She gestured to the orange rifle. "And this toy you mocked? This is the Mark V, the prototype for the very M210 sniper system you have slung on your back. The orange paint you found so amusing? That was so a medevac chopper could spot her position for extraction after she spent 3 days holding off an entire enemy platoon, alone, protecting a downed pilot who went on to become a 4-star general." The silence was absolute, thick with shame. "You did not see a veteran," the general growled. "You saw an old woman. You saw weakness where you should have seen unimaginable strength. You have dishonored your uniform." As the general's words hung in the air, Eleanor finally spoke, her voice calm. "General, they're young. They're proud. They just need to learn where to point it." She looked at Evans, her eyes holding no anger, only weary wisdom. "Humility, son. It's the one thing that will carry you the furthest." The events of that Mojave afternoon were more than just about a record-breaking shot. They serve as a profound lesson that true strength is often quiet and unseen. Heroism doesn't always come with thunderous applause. Sometimes it resides in the steady gaze of an old woman and the hidden history she carries within her, a quiet testament to a legacy forged in fire and forgotten by time. Have you ever underestimated someone based on their appearance or age? What would you have thought watching Corporal Evans and his condescending behavior? Do you believe there are people like Eleanor with extraordinary pasts, living quiet lives all around us, their stories waiting to be told? In our society today, do you think we give these silent heroes the full measure of respect and honor they so rightly deserve? If this story about humility and hidden strength moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about the incredible heroes who walk among us. Share this with someone who respects our veterans and understands the sacrifices they've made. We read every single one of your comments and value your perspective. More stories about courage and honor are waiting for you right on your screen. Watch those next, and we'll see you tomorrow with another incredible report on a single moment that turned the tables completely. We will see you tomorrow.